I was dating the town's golden boy, Toby, but every time I closed my eyes, I wasn't picturing his smile. I was picturing his father. Silas was a formidable man, built of mountain stone and iron, a contractor with hands that knew exactly how to break me. I'm Reed, and I'm about to tell you how my inheritance became my undoing. If you've ever wanted something so forbidden it makes your blood burn, then you'll know why I couldn't walk away, even when the truth threatened to destroy a family. This is the story of the night the storm trapped us together, and the foundation of our lives finally crumbled. The inheritance didn't come with a warning. It came in a thick, cream-colored envelope that smelled of old paper, cold mountain air, and a faint hint of cedarwood. My uncle, a man I hadn't seen since I was a small boy playing with wooden blocks at his feet, had left me the Blackwood Estate. To the high-priced lawyers in the city, it was just another line on a spreadsheet, a piece of decaying property on the jagged, unforgiving edge of the Blue Ridge Mountains. But to me, as I sat in my sterile office surrounded by glass and steel, it felt like a life raft. I was an architect by trade, but I had spent the last 5 years designing shopping malls and parking garages. My soul was being crushed by the gray monotony of urban life. I needed something real. I needed wood. I needed earth, and I needed a place where the air didn't taste like the exhaust of a million cars. When I finally drove up that long, winding gravel path 3 weeks later, the dust kicked up behind my car like a ghost following me home. The house was a Victorian masterpiece, though masterpiece was a generous word for something that looked like it was being slowly, methodically reclaimed by the forest. The gray paint was peeling like sunburnt skin. The wraparound porch sagged like the shoulders of a tired old man who had carried too much weight for too long. And the windows, those high, narrow eyes of the house, were clouded with decades of mountain mist and secrets. But beneath the rot and the vines, I saw the bones. I saw the exquisite craftsmanship in the gables and the unyielding strength in the ancient timber. I stood there, the mountain air sharp and cold in my lungs, and for the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel like I was running away from something. I felt like I was arriving. Meeting Toby was an accident of fate, a stroke of luck that I would later come to realize was the first step toward a cliff. I had gone into the town of Oakhaven, a tiny cluster of brick buildings nestled in a valley that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s. I was standing in the local hardware store, staring hopelessly at a display of plumbing fixtures, when a voice behind me said, "You look like a man who's about to buy the wrong pipe for a Victorian septic system." I turned, and there was Toby. He was 24, with sun-bleached hair that looked like it had spent the entire summer in the light, and a smile that could melt the winter frost off a window pane. His eyes were the color of a clear mountain creek, bright and full of a kind of innocent energy I hadn't seen in years. He was easy to talk to, kind to a fault, and within 2 weeks we were seeing each other. Toby was safe. He was the kind of man who brought me wildflowers from the ridge and told me stories about the local legends of the mountains. When he kissed me, it was sweet and gentle, like a summer breeze. But whenever we sat on the porch of the estate at night, watching the fireflies dance in the tall grass, a strange, hollow ache sat in the center of my chest. I told myself it was just the stress of the renovation, the weight of the silence that seemed to drip from the trees. "Reed, you're going to kill yourself trying to fix this place alone," Toby said one evening, his hand resting gently on my knee. We were sitting on a pair of old crates I'd turned into makeshift chairs. "My dad, he's the best contractor in 3 counties. He's built half the cabins on this ridge with his own 2 hands. He's a formidable man, a bit old school, but he's the only one I trust with a house this old. Let me call him." I agreed, thinking I was just hiring a contractor to fix a sagging floor. I didn't know I was inviting a storm into my house. The day Silas arrived, the air was heavy, the kind of stillness that precedes a lightning strike. I heard the truck before I saw it, a deep, rhythmic throb that vibrated through the floorboards and seemed to hum in my very teeth. A black, heavy-duty dually pulled into the drive,
its engine growling like a beast that had been awakened from a long sleep. When the door opened, the atmosphere of the entire estate shifted. Silas stepped out, and I felt the breath leave my lungs as if I'd been hit in the solar plexus. He was a massive man, built with a rugged, functional power that made the world around him look fragile. He was in his mid-40s, his face a landscape of sharp angles, weathered skin, and deep-set amber eyes that seemed to catch every flicker of light. He wore a canvas work vest over a charcoal gray thermal shirt, the sleeves pushed up to reveal forearms that were thick, corded with muscle, and covered in a fine layer of dark hair.
He didn't look like Toby. Toby was a boy. Silas was a man in the most primitive, overwhelming sense of the word. "You're the one baiting my son," Silas said. His voice was a low, resonant bass that I felt in my marrow. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact that felt like a judgment. He didn't offer a handshake at first. He just stood there, towering over me, smelling of pine shavings, expensive tobacco, and raw, masculine heat. When he finally did reach out, his palm was huge, wrapping entirely around mine. It was rough, covered in the hard-earned calluses of a man who had spent his life shaping the world to his will. Touching him felt like touching a live wire. A jolt of pure, unadulterated electricity surged up my arm, and for a split second I forgot my own name. I saw his eyes widen just a fraction, a flash of recognition passing through those amber depths. He didn't let go immediately. He held my hand for a heartbeat too long, his thumb grazing against my pulse point. "Toby says you've got a project," Silas grunted, his eyes dropping to the base of my throat before returning to my face. "Project isn't the word for it. This house is a disaster waiting to happen. The foundation is shifting, the beams are rotting, and the roof is a prayer away from collapsing. Most city men don't have the stomach for what this house requires." "I think I can handle it," I challenged, feeling a strange, desperate need to prove myself to this giant of a man. Silas let out a low, huffing sound, not quite a laugh, but something close. "We'll see. I'll take the job, but I do things my way. I don't follow city rules. If I'm in this house, I'm the one in charge." He walked past me then, his shoulder brushing mine, and I felt the heat of him through my clothes. As he entered the house, the old Victorian seemed to sigh, as if it finally recognized its master. For the first week, Silas was a shadow that moved with the sun. He was at the house every morning at 5:30 a.m., his truck a low rumble in the driveway before the mountain birds had even started their chorus. I would wake up to the rhythmic, heavy thud of his boots on the stairs, a sound that felt less like construction and more like a heartbeat for the house. I found myself unable to stay in bed, drawn toward the sound of him. I was supposed to be working on my own architectural designs in the study, but the clean lines of my blueprints felt sterile and lifeless compared to the raw energy Silas brought into the rooms. I spent most of my time wandering the hallways under the guise of checking the progress, but the truth was much simpler. I just wanted to watch him. There was a specific afternoon in the library where the air between us finally reached its breaking point. The room was thick with the scent of old leather books and fresh sawdust. Silas was perched on a high ladder, his massive arms raised above his head as he inspected a crumbling mahogany ceiling beam. He had discarded his canvas work vest as the mountain sun began to pour through the tall windows, leaving him in just a thin, white-ribbed tank top. As he reached up to brace the timber, the fabric strained across his back, revealing the immense power in his shoulders. I stood in the doorway, paralyzed. I could see the thick mat of dark hair that started at the base of his throat and disappeared into the neck of his shirt, damp with the honest sweat of a man who worked for every inch of his life. His muscles moved like liquid under his tan skin, and the sheer physical scale of him made the high-ceilinged room feel cramped.
I was supposed to be dating his son. I was supposed to be thinking about Toby's bright laughter and the easy life we were building. But as I watched Silas, watching the way he dominated the space, the way his large, capable hands handled the ancient wood with both violence and tenderness, I felt a desperate desire that made my knees weak. It wasn't just physical. It was an attraction to the formidable nature of the man himself.
Silas climbed down the ladder with a grace that shouldn't have belonged to a man of his size. He didn't look at me, but I knew he was aware of my presence. The air always seemed to crackle when we were in the same room. He walked over to the makeshift table where I had placed a glass of iced water, wiped the sawdust from his forehead with a rag, and took a long, slow drink. "You're staring again, Reed," he said, his back still turned to me. His voice was a low vibration that seemed to travel through the floorboards and settle in my chest. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. "I'm just amazed at how quickly you're moving," I managed to say, my voice sounding thin and breathless. He turned around slowly, his amber eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that felt like a physical weight. He was sweating, the moisture making his skin glisten in the afternoon light. He stepped toward me, closing the gap until I was backed against the mahogany bookshelves, the scent of him, cedar, sweat, and something raw, filling my senses. He placed one large, calloused hand next to my head, leaning in until we were inches apart. "The progress is fine," Silas whispered, his face inches from mine. I could feel the heat radiating off his body. "The foundation is the problem. If the foundation isn't solid, the whole thing comes down. Do you understand what I'm saying, Reed?" His eyes were searching mine, stripping away the polite city mask I wore. I knew he wasn't talking about the house. He was talking about the lie I was living. The fact that I was sleeping in a bed thinking of him while his son was waiting for me in town. "I understand," I whispered back, my voice trembling. Silas lingered there for a long moment, his gaze dropping to my lips. His presence was formidable, overwhelming, and for a second I was certain he was going to kiss me right there among the ruins of my uncle's library. I wanted him to. I wanted those massive hands to pull me in and end the agonizing tension. Instead, his jaw tightened and he straightened up, giving a curt, professional nod that felt like a slap. "Tomorrow, we start on the master bedroom. Make sure you're ready. It's going to be a long day." As his truck rumbled away that evening, leaving me in the gathering shadows of the porch, I realized I was in deep, irreversible trouble. Because the only thing more dangerous than the secrets hidden in the walls of the Blackwood Estate was the fire Silas had started inside me, a fire that Toby, with all his sweetness, could never hope to put out. The mountain has a way of turning on you without warning, a silent predator that waits for the perfect moment to strike. One minute the peaks were bathed in a deceptive golden peace, and the next the sky began to curdle into a bruised, angry charcoal. A week had passed since the incident in the library, and the air between Silas and me had become a physical weight, a pressure system that made it hard to draw a full breath. We didn't talk much anymore. We didn't have to. Every look was a challenge. Every accidental brush of our shoulders in the narrow hallways was a spark that threatened to ignite the very air. Toby had headed down to the valley for the weekend to help with the town's annual harvest festival. He'd invited me, his eyes bright with the prospect of shared funnel cakes and carnival games, but I used the excuse of looming deadlines to stay behind. The truth was far uglier. I couldn't stand the guilt of holding Toby's hand, that kind, gentle hand, while my eyes were constantly, desperately searching for his father. I was a man living a double life in my own head, and the walls were closing in. Silas had stayed behind too. He claimed the West Wing roof wouldn't survive the coming gale without extra bracing, and no one questioned him. Silas was the law on this ridge.
By 6 p.m., the first crack of thunder split the sky like a giant breaking a dry branch. The wind began to howl through the hemlocks, a mournful, high-pitched scream that made the old Victorian house groan in its joints. I was in the kitchen, trying to focus on a pot of tea, when the rain hit, not as a drizzle, but as a vertical deluge that turned the world outside into a blurred, gray sheet of water. Within minutes, the gravel driveway was a churning river of mud. The back door creaked open, fighting against the wind, and Silas stepped in. He was drenched to the bone. If I thought he was formidable before, seeing him like this was a new, exquisite kind of torture. His charcoal thermal shirt was soaked through, clinging like a second skin to the massive, undulating muscles of his chest and shoulders. Water dripped from the tips of his dark hair and ran in rivulets down the rugged, weathered planes of his face, disappearing into the thick mat of dark hair visible through the wet, translucent fabric of his shirt. He looked less like a contractor and more like a force of nature that had just walked out of the earth itself.
"The road's gone," Silas grunted, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that was deeper than the thunder shaking the foundation. "Old Oak teamed down across the creek bridge. Nobody's getting up or down this mountain tonight, not even with a four-wheel drive." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. We were alone. Just as I opened my mouth to respond, the power flickered once, twice, and then died completely, plunging the house into a deep, velvety darkness. The only light came from the blue-white flashes of lightning illuminating the kitchen. I moved on instinct, lighting the emergency candles I'd kept in the parlor. The amber flames cast long, flickering shadows of Silas's massive frame against the peeling wallpaper, making him look even larger, even more predatory. "You should get out of those wet clothes," I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to sound composed. "You'll catch your death in this draft." Silas didn't move toward the stairs. Instead, he walked toward me, the heat radiating from his soaked body meeting the chill of the darkened room. He stopped so close I could smell the rain, the iron of the storm, and the raw, earthy scent of a man who spent his life outdoors. "I need you to stop pretending, Reed," he whispered. He reached out, his hand, rough, warm, and heavy, landing on the back of my neck. His thumb traced the sensitive skin behind my ear, sending a jolt of pure fire down my spine. "Tell me to stop. Tell me you don't want this. Tell me you love my son, and I'll walk into that storm and sleep in the truck. But you have to say it now, because I'm at my limit." I looked up at the man who had rebuilt my house and was now systematically destroying my life. The choice wasn't a choice. It was a landslide, and I was already buried. "Don't stop," I whispered. The kiss was a collision, an act of possession that tasted of bourbon, salt, and raw, desperate desire. Silas didn't hold back, and neither did I. He backed me against the heavy mahogany door of the parlor, his massive frame pinning me there, his weight a welcome, crushing pressure. His hands, those large, powerful hands that knew exactly how to shape wood and steel, were now shaping me, moving over my ribs and into my hair with a hunger that felt like it had been building for decades. "Reed," he breathed against my neck, his voice a broken, jagged vibration. "I have no idea. I've been burning alive since the day I saw you." He pulled his wet shirt over his head in one fluid motion, discarding it on the floor. In the candlelight, he was a masterpiece of masculine power. His chest was broad, a mountain of muscle covered in that thick, dark hair that tapered down into the waistband of his heavy work trousers. When he lifted me, I felt weightless, my legs wrapping instinctively around his thick waist as he carried me toward the rug in front of the fireplace. We spent the night in the glow of the dying embers. Silas was surprisingly gentle for a man of his size, his touch reverent, almost as if he were afraid he might break me, but his grip was firm, unyielding.
He treated me like something precious, something he had been searching for in the timber and the stone for his entire life. In the heat of that room, with the scent of wood smoke and skin filling the air, the world outside didn't exist. Toby didn't exist. There was only the rhythmic thud of our hearts and the sound of the rain lashing against the windows. But as the first gray, sickly light of dawn began to bleed through the shutters, reality settled over the room like cold ash. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world that felt broken and unfamiliar. Silas sat on the edge of the hearth, his head in his hands, his broad, muscular back a map of tension and regret. The formidable man was gone, replaced by a father who had just committed the ultimate betrayal.
"The rain stopped," he said, his voice flat and hollow. "The creek will be low enough for the truck by noon." "Silas, we need to talk about what this means," I said, wrapped in a wool blanket, feeling the sudden, biting chill of the morning. He turned, and the look in his amber eyes broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. It was a mixture of raw, undeniable love and soul-crushing guilt. "There's nothing to talk about, Reed. I'm his father. I just betrayed the only person in this world who still looks at me with pride. I'll finish the work on the house. I gave my word on that. But after that, I'm gone. You stay with Toby. You give him the life he deserves. And we never, ever mention this night again." "You think you can just turn it off?" I asked, my voice rising with a mix of anger and desperation. "After this?" Silas stood up, his massive frame blocking out the morning light. He walked to the door, stopping for a heartbeat without turning back. "I have to, Reed, because if I don't, I'll lose my son. And looking at you right now, I realized I've already lost my soul." The sound of his truck cranking in the driveway an hour later was the loneliest sound I'd ever heard. I stood in the center of the parlor, looking at the indentations in the rug, realizing that while the house was finally being rebuilt, the family that was supposed to fill it was being torn apart at the seams.
The week following the storm was a masterclass in agony. The house was finished. The Victorian crown molding gleamed under fresh coats of oil, the floors were sanded to a mirror finish, and the Blackwood Estate finally looked like the sanctuary I had dreamed of back in the city. But every time I walked through those beautiful, high-ceilinged rooms, I didn't see a home. I saw a crime scene. Every corner of the parlor reminded me of Silas's hands, and every shadow in the hallway felt like a witness to our betrayal. Toby was back from the valley, more energetic and loving than ever. He was so proud of the work his father had done. He would walk from room to room, running his fingers over the wood, his eyes bright with a future that was already dead. "My dad really did it, didn't he?" Toby said, standing in the middle of the master suite we had just completed. The sun was setting over the ridge, casting a golden glow over everything. "I told you he was the best. He's a man of his word, Reed. Always has been." I felt a physical stabbing pain in my chest. Silas was in the other room, packing up his heavy steel tool chest for the last time. He hadn't looked at me once since the night of the storm. He had been a ghost in his own work, a formidable shadow that moved with a grim, silent efficiency that felt like a funeral march. "We should celebrate tonight," Toby continued, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind and resting his chin on my shoulder. "A housewarming dinner, just the three of us. I want to toast to the man who built this for us." I tried to protest, my mouth opening to craft a lie, but the words died in my throat. How do you tell the man you're dating that you can't share a meal with his father because the desperate desire you feel for him is louder than the sound of the mountain wind? That evening, the dining room was lit by the same candles we had used during the storm. I had cooked a meal I couldn't taste, my stomach in knots. Toby was talking about our future, about moving his things in, about the life we were going to build in these mountains. Silas sat across from us, his large frame hunched over his plate, his jaw set so tight I thought his teeth might crack under the pressure. "Dad, you okay?"
Toby asked, his smile faltering as he looked at his father. "You've barely said a word all night. You're usually the first one to celebrate a finished job." Silas looked up, his amber eyes flicking to me for a split second, a look of such profound misery that it nearly brought me to my knees before landing on his son. "Just tired, Toby. It was a hard job. The foundation was worse than I thought it would be." "Well, you fixed it," Toby said, reaching out to clink his glass against Silas's. "To the man who can fix anything. To my hero." The guilt reached a boiling point. The air in the room felt thick, like it was made of lead. I stood up too fast, my chair scraping harshly against the new hardwood. "I need some air," I choked out, stumbling toward the porch before either of them could respond. I was standing at the railing, looking out at the dark mountain peaks, when I heard the screen door creak. I thought it was Toby. I was ready to apologize, to make up another excuse. But when I turned, it was the formidable silhouette of Silas. He looked devastated in the moonlight. "He's going to ask you tonight, Reed," Silas whispered, his voice a broken, jagged rasp. "He told me in the kitchen while you were setting the table. He's got the ring in his pocket. He wants to do it right here, in the house I built." My world tilted. "I can't do it, Silas. I can't marry him. Not now." "You have to," Silas growled, stepping closer, his scent, that intoxicating mix of pine and wood smoke, making me ache. "Because if you don't, I'll have to tell him why. And I can't look at my boy, my only son, and tell him I'm the reason his heart is in pieces on the floor." The confrontation didn't happen on the porch. It happened in the foyer, 5 minutes later, and it was more destructive than any mountain storm. Toby had come looking for us. He had walked out onto the porch just in time to see Silas's hand resting on my cheek, a gesture of goodbye that looked exactly like what it was, a gesture of pure, unyielding love. Silas was leaning down, his forehead against mine, his formidable strength failing him for the first time in his life. The silence that followed was louder than any thunder. Toby stood in the doorway, his face turning ashen. He looked at his father's hand on my skin, then at my tear-streaked face, and finally at the small velvet ring box he was clutching in his own hand. "Toby," Silas began, his voice cracking, stepping back and trying to straighten his shoulders. "Son, it's not." "How long?" Toby asked. His voice wasn't angry. It was hollow, the sound of a man who had just watched his entire world vanish. "How long have you been looking at him like that, Dad? While I was talking about our future, were you both just waiting for me to leave the room so you could touch each other?" "It wasn't like that," I sobbed, but the words were empty. Toby looked at Silas, the man he had worshipped and modeled his life after. "You were the one person I thought was untouchable, Dad. You were the formidable Silas Blackwood, the man with the honor, the man who fixed things." He threw the ring box onto the floor. The sound of the velvet hitting the wood was the final nail in the coffin of the family. "Keep the house, Reed. You two deserve each other. You're both built on the same foundation of lies." Toby walked down the steps and into the night. We watched his taillights disappear down the gravel drive, leaving us in a silence that felt like a burial. Silas sank onto the porch steps, his massive shoulders shaking. I sat down beside him, placing my hand over his. He didn't pull away this time. There was no one left to hide from, and nothing left to save. "He'll never forgive us," Silas whispered, his voice disappearing into the mountain wind. "No," I agreed, looking up at the beautiful dark house behind us. The Blackwood Estate was finished. It was grand, strong, and silent. But as I looked at the man beside me, the man I had destroyed a life to be with, I realized that while some foundations are built on rock, ours was built on fire. We had the fire, and now, in the cold mountain night, we had to see if we could survive the burn. Sometimes, the most formidable thing a man can do is admit that he's broken.
Reed and Silas found a love that was real, but it came at a price that most people could never pay. It's a story about the gray areas of the heart, where desire meets duty, and where the people we love the most are the ones we hurt the deepest. If this story touched your heart, or if you believe that everyone deserves a chance at a real connection, even if it starts in the ruins of a secret, please consider joining our family here. Click that subscribe button and turn on notifications for Gay Stories Chronicles. We tell the stories that others are afraid to whisper. Leave a comment below. Would you have chosen Toby's safety or Silas's fire? I'll see you in the next Chronicle.